Now then, reefers, welcome to episode 2 of Coral Freaks Presents an Audience With. In this episode, we have Pat and Trina from Reef Wholesale and Thein from Tidal Gardens. Enjoy.
So my next guests are perhaps less well known out of some of our panellists, but I'll tell you what, they're really important because I didn't know, I'd seen them in a video, an Ecotech video that's been on YouTube for a long time. And so I recognised them straight away. And I wasn't aware that the work that they did with lighting in their facility. So this is Patrick Foster and Trina Parsons. They're from Reef Wholesale in Canada. So it's a livestock and dry goods wholesaler, a big one. And just talking to you the other night, you know, we haven't talked before, but I deeply respect any good retailers, but behind every good retailer, there's a good supplier, a good wholesaler. And you guys, you know, you're supplying dozens or hundreds of stores, and you're breeding stuff as well as developing lighting to the point where when Ecotech wanted to test out their Radians on Gen 3, was it 7 to 8 years ago, they came to your facility.
Yes.
Yeah. Can you tell us about that?
So I guess, when we look at it now, it was about 8 years ago, which is surprising how quickly time passes, right? But we've been running lighting. We sell a bunch of acros, LPS, softies. Patrick specifically is known amongst our stores and everything as a stickhead. So we'd been running LED lighting on our softies and our LPS for quite a while, testing out which brands we liked best, things like that. And it came to time to start to try to look at our SPS, and Ecotech did come to us and say, we'd like to see if you could see how the G3 Pros go on your acro tanks. And we run 40-foot rows of corals, and they're divided up amongst acros, LPS, and that type of thing.
And sorry, just to interject. So 7 to 8 years ago, there was still a lot of LED lighting skeptics, especially when it came to demanding corals.
We were diehard metal halide T5 guys.
Yep.
Yes.
So at the time we were, ATI power modules, a couple daylights, a lot of Blue Plus in there.
And it wasn't broke, so why fix it? I mean, you weren't, they came to you. You weren't saying, sign me up for LED.
Yeah, no, definitely not, right? Yeah.
No, and like you said, there's a lot of skeptics. Some people saying you could grow your acropora under it, some of it not. We were really nervous, in all honesty, when we started it. So what we said before we were willing to change a complete row was we decided to run side-by-side comparisons. So we ran metal halides and T5s, like Patrick mentioned.
Yeah.
And what we ended up doing was setting up tanks. So one tank was specifically just metal halide lit, Phoenix HQI with the Reef Bright LED blues as supplements. And the next one was the ATI power modules, the 10 bulb fixtures with 8 of the Aqua Blue specials from ATI, and then 2 daylights. And then our next 2 tanks in that row, what we did is we split them up. So half of it was lit by metal halide, half was lit by the G3 Pros.
Yeah.
And then we did the exact same thing under the T5s. And what we were hoping to see was, can we achieve the same results? We were culturing a lot at the same time. Will we be able to keep the acros alive long term? Will we be able to see the same growth? Will we be able to see the same coloration? And some people, I think that we just kind of set it and forget it. But it was a weekly, sometimes bi-weekly task. What happened is we set it based on our eyes. In our facility, we noticed that the women seemed to have a better catch on the colors. So that quickly became my task, was to go in and match it according to what my eyes saw should be the same coloration.
So this is no spectrometers, no kind of par meters initially. This
Not
is just
initially.
you saying, I think that looks a bit like T5.
Well, the initial setup when we put it in there, right? It's like, okay, this looks to your eye, it's like this looks like it's the same as the Blue Plus. This looks like it's the same as the HQI. But then you run that for a little bit, and she's coming to me for feedback on, well, how are the corals doing? And then you look at the corals, and you're like, they're not doing so well. So obviously, like our eyes, we know that our eyes can't pick up on the intensity of the blue lighting. So then it became incremental improvements or incremental changes that Trina would do.
Yeah.
And come to me to ask how the corals are looking.
And when you read the Ecotech Coral Labs, you see the PAR ratings and spectrometers. That was actually after the fact. So after we'd run for about a year, We had proven pictures, results. We could say these are the two pieces that have been run. Again, because we import directly, we're able to take same species that were maricultured together and do these comparisons that way. But it was crazy. I would change red by 1%.
Wow.
Right? And then you'd let it go for a couple weeks. And then we'd come back again and go either that worked well, or like Patrick said, it didn't work well. Oh no, you can't see the pinks or the blues, and you go back and adjust the green. So it was very much one small piece at a time. Sometimes it was successful, sometimes it wasn't. And it's why we actually had quite a few corals. So again, in the paper, you just see 1 or 2 photos, but we would have, I think it was somewhere between 6 and 10 of one species.
And so,
that we're
so just
comparing.
tell us about this paper. This is a white paper on the Ecotech website. Is that right?
Yes.
Correct. It's on the front page of the Ecotech website. Now I believe you have to scroll to the bottom to see it, but it's still on there, right? And you go to the bottom and you can actually see the write-up on it. We even had to like, if you had a bleaching event because you turned a channel too high, we would have to cycle those pieces out and move them back to an LED or sorry, a T5 section, color it back up. And meanwhile, so for any one piece that's in there, in order to try to match the coloration that we were seeing and the growth that we were seeing of it under LED, you're like, oh, okay, there's one red planet over there. It's like, yeah, there were probably 8 actually. But because we had made mistakes on the spectrum, we had caused bleaching. The other ones are actually being cycled out and in another tank to be colored back up.
Wow. So you actually invented AB Plus.
Yes.
Yeah, we developed that there. Yeah.
What does AB Plus stand for?
Aqua Blue Special.
Like the T5?
Like the
Exactly.
I thought
named
so,
after
yeah.
The T5.
Yeah. Okay. So, and something else that I saw in the video, I think it was you, Patrick, it might have been you actually, Trina, talking about DLI. Can you talk to us about DLI, what it means and how you use it?
So DLI is more intensity with respect to duration. So when you're looking at just the overall intensity, and everyone looks at par. But the truth is it's not the be-all, end-all answer. So that came about because Ecotech came to our facility and then they were looking at our par values and they said, okay, you put that leptastria there. Why did you put that leptastria there? It's like, well, I don't know. It looks the happiest there, right? like it grow, and they're like, okay, how do you quantify that it looks the happiest? Just grows the best, right?
Observation is key. Yeah.
Observation, right? Okay, well then they go to Worldwide now, and they go to Worldwide, and they ask Josh at Worldwide. They say, well, why do you put that piece there? And it's the same piece that we're growing. And Josh goes, I don't know. That's where it's happy. It's like, okay, but are you looking at the par? It's like, no. They asked us, are you looking at the par? No, we're not observing the par. And then they're measuring the par, and the par values on our tanks are totally different. So then Jay from Ecotech went back and then started looking at it a bit more. And it's like, okay, there has to be a correlation there. We know the lighting is important, but the par values are so different. So then when we started looking at it, and it's like intensity with respect to duration, and we looked at the same corals that we were growing and the same corals that Worldwide were growing. And then when you looked at intensity with respect to duration, our DLI was within 5%. Like it was almost exactly the same. And neither of us were taking par meters, measuring the intensity, how long are we running the lighting. It was how long are we running the lighting. And it's observational. That piece looks the best there. It grows the best there. It's a farmer mentality on how you're looking at your corals, as opposed to just a number value on its own. Because at the time, none of us really understood its intensity with respect to duration. So our intensity, our duration was 8 hours, and Worldwide was running their lights for 12 hours. But our DLI was actually within 5% on almost every single piece that was out there.
And I think there was some footage on just Montipora capricornis, but some were scrolling more tightly and some were more open. Can you tell us about that? What caused that?
Yeah, so we did 2 side-by-side coral tanks. So one was, both tanks were 4x8. We did the same lighting. We did the same flow for a detritus-free coral system. We put the same pieces from the same mothers and in the same locations in each tank, and then we let them grow out, right? And then we did the same DLI, but we did observe a structural difference in the way that the corals grew. So under higher intensity, the Montes would scroll upwards towards the surface. They would grow like this. And then from the side, technically, you'd be looking at the underside of the Monte more, right? And under the lower intensity for longer duration, they were growing outwards continually. So using that alone, even if you don't have a par meter, you can actually tell how your intensity is doing in your tank. If your Montes are growing long and flat and out, that means the intensity is a little bit lower for that Monte. If it's growing up and scrolling like a cup, then you know right away that that's a higher intensity. And even though they were at the same DLI, the structural difference on that was completely different. And at that point, then we're going back to research papers and looking at it, because it's like, okay, to me, if you have a lower intensity, the Monte looks like it should grow upwards, right? It's seeking the light, it's growing up. Well, actually what they're doing is they're growing out and they're seeking light, like, oh, I'm under a ledge. If I grow out like this, I hopefully will find some light, and then I can start scrolling upwards towards the light.
So how many radians do you have in your facility then?
Oh, a lot. We're well over 100 at this point.
100?
Yeah.
And that's
We're well
different
over 100.
generations as well, or?
Yeah, we have some G1s that have now been relegated to ceiling lights. Those are the clock error ridden lights that can no longer be programmed, but they're still perfectly acceptable for a softies tank or an invert system or something. And they're strapped to our ceiling. So people come in and they go, oh, come on, really? You're sticking radions on your ceiling now? And it's like, yeah, okay. Well, maybe with a little caveat. It's not really good for anything else at this point, right?
But most of our tanks right now, we've upgraded to G5s.
We have G5s,
and we're
G6s.
moving into G6s across everything.
G4s are still one of my all-time favorite light. I really like the intensity on the G4s. We also keep our lighting a lot higher above the tank. So with the light being, 30 inches off of the water, it is a commercial tank. Like, our hands are in there all the time. Staff is in there all the time. We're fragging, we're moving pieces in, we're taking pieces out. If the lights would be close to the water, we would get splash, we would have damaged lights. And really, to make sure that they're lasting longer, they need to be mounted higher. So for us, the G4s really gave us that punch downwards, where the intensity was more focused straight down and into the tank, and we were getting the par and the growth that we wanted to see.
And like all good wholesalers and importers, you visit your suppliers, don't you, overseas?
Yeah, all the time, yes.
All of them?
All of them. We're continually like spot checking them, right? So we check, are they keeping the staff well paid? If you go in, are the staff wearing, ragged old clothes? Or do they look like they're well dressed? Do they take care of the staff that are there? Are they, we show up unannounced, or we'll call a supplier and say, hey, I'd like to come visit, right? Oh, yeah. Come to Bali, of course. I'm like, all right, I'm 10 minutes down the street, right? So then we can show up. Is there food in the tank? If they're keeping fish and they've got a big fish system there, anytime that you come up, there should be leftover fish in the tank. There should be leftover food. If you come in and the tanks are empty and they're perfectly clean and there's no algae, they didn't feed, right? So in terms of the supply chain, you want to make sure that when the fish is pulled from the ocean, the fish are getting fed properly, they're nice and fat, they need to be purged before they ship, but they need to be fed at the exporters. Right.
And what do you find, you always learn so much when you go overseas and you visit suppliers, and, I presume you go to mariculture facilities in Indonesia. I mean, what just stood out, first of all? What, as an aquarist, you get there and go, oh, they're doing that, what are the key differences?
I think one of the key ones that we have implemented most recently is that all fish absolutely need to be separate. So when you go to Philippines, you go to Indonesia, in Indonesia, they keep every single electric blue leg in its own little cup with a lid, right? Now there, they have unlimited manpower, so they can take that cup and they can drain the water out of it every day and then feed it. For us, we started developing a racking system to put all the cups in that drains really well, that flows really well. And now we keep every blood shrimp separate. We keep every single damsel, which are hundreds, in separate cups, right? But that means that every single damsel, when it goes out to our customer, they haven't been knocking scales out of each other. Every time a fish knocks scales out of each other, you've created like an infection point for Uranema to come up and hop onto the fish, right? It's open top. So for us, it's very easy to feed. We feed our fish 5 to 8 times per day.
Wow.
So don't ask me what the phosphate is on the fish system.
Yeah.
Because it is totally unmeasurable by every kit in existence.
And how does that affect when you're going to ship them, though? If they've got full bellies, do you plan ahead? Do you say, stop feeding them now, they're shipping in the morning, or?
We don't feed the day of shipping, but
Yeah.
we feed right up to the day before shipping. And luckily, shipping within Canada, we're kind of grandfathered in with the airlines because we've been a customer for so long. So our shipping rate within Canada is very, very low. So a damsel, we could send it in a 5 or 6 inch bag versus when it's coming from Indonesia, it might be in like an inch and a half bag, like very small diameter. So for us, we can kind of overpack the fish, but then that in combination with the fact that they're just good, healthy fish, if there's a bit of waste in the bag, they have lots of energy and they're very strong and they're going to do well when they get there.
So-
Cheap fish are not good fish.
So how do you ship anything at all in Canada? Bearing in mind, we've got retailers already stopping shipping because it's winter in the UK. How do you ship across freezing Canada? How does that work?
So it's taken us just a few years to get it really nailed down well. But we put some heat packs in it. We make sure that there's a bit of an air gap.
Yeah, you have to, that's a number one mistake too. If any store gets a box and they open their box and they take out the heat pack and it's cold, and then 10 minutes later it starts warming up, the supplier didn't put enough oxygen in there.
Yeah.
So you need to leave extra space. So we did tests at our facility where we would pack the fish and then we would stick them in our van outside and just leave them in the lovely -30 weather.
Yep.
Right. And go check on it in an hour and a half or 2 hours, because you have to assume that the airline is going to apply a certain level of abuse onto a shipment.
Yeah.
We learned that, like on the styro, if you tape
Taping.
the edges of the styrofoam, that's going to grant you 10 degrees, maybe not on a good day, but on a day where they neglect your box, that's going to grant you 10 degrees. We learned that, you tape every seam on the cardboard. Inside the styrofoam, we do a bag to just reduce air transfer. Outside the styrofoam, we do another bag. If it's particularly nasty in somewhere like Nova Scotia or Newfoundland, we'll put another bag on the outside of that and really tape it shut and just stop all air transfer going in and out. But otherwise, we're sending every week to every major city in Canada, regardless of the nastiest, coldest weather, and we don't have any problems with the livestock arriving there. Okay.
And I believe, Thein, you shop there for some products. Is that right? For some corals?
Oh, no,
No,
he's in the
never.
US. He
Oh,
can't do
sorry.
that.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah, different country. I was wrong. I
No,
was wrong.
just friends.
Yeah. What was I going to say? So fish health. I learned something from you the other night because we were looking at David Saxby's tank and talking about surgeon fish. And what you told me about powder blue tangs, powder browns, Achilles was just gold dust, because I actively discourage people from buying powder blue tangs. They're a nightmare. They get ick, etc. How many powder blues have you lost, Patrick?
Minus from problems importing, we don't lose any powder blues, we don't lose powder browns, we don't lose powder grays, and we don't lose Achilles. So when somebody asks us to quarantine an Achilles and they're going to pay for it, no problem. It's quite easy. How many people have tried Achilles? Huh? How many people have lost Achilles? Oh, that's pretty good.
That's
right?
actually really
That's
good.
really, really good. But I'm sure most people have lost a powder blue. I'm sure most people have lost a powder brown, and everybody's afraid of them. And really, it's about getting a very good, healthy animal, number one. But number two, after that, you want to keep them in copper.
Okay,
Right.
let's talk copper, Patrick. This is important.
Yep, absolutely. So copper, I hear that most people here seem to use CChem. That seems to be the number one thing that everybody uses. But CChem has its own challenges, right? They have the little sliding scale for testing the copper. Well, we learned in our facility that depending on who was testing the copper, we were getting totally different values. So we took all of our staff, we took the same sample of water that we had done, and we had done the test. You see the blue on it. Okay, everybody go up, do your sliding colorimeter, and everybody get the values. And then we took our values, we all went into the office after, and we compared. And the values ranged from way too low to way too high, and all the fish should be dying. Well, then we did a little bit of reading, and we learned that men have less blue cones in our eyes. So when your wife says, how come you can't see the color difference on this, right? You can't. We cannot necessarily see the difference. And for that reason, we went from using CChem to using Copper Safe or Copper Power. And with that, you can use the HANA checker, and that will give you a reliable, repeatable value that you can use every time to keep your copper in the right range. And if you keep your copper in the right range, when you quarantine any of the powder blues, powder browns, or Achilles, you will not have any problem with copper. Or with ick, sorry. It's so easy to keep them and make them healthy.
And you told me there's also a relationship between the copper amount that you dose and the specific gravity.
Absolutely. So if you're quarantining and it's 1.026 for salinity with copper power or copper safe, your copper should be 2.0. And then if you're keeping it at 1.018, which is where we keep ours, your copper should be down at 1.55. And it's a linear scale. So you can just take that data and literally, I'm going to keep it at 2.0 and then just extrapolate from there.
So how long would you keep the fish in copper for?
30 days is usually pretty
30?
good. Yeah,
Right.
yeah. I mean, the longer the better, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Usually it will clear up within 5 to 7 days.
But there is a paradox with lower salinity and uranema.
Yes, there is. So at lower salinity, your uranema gets significantly worse. Everything else gets better. Flukes is a little bit easier. So if you have like gill flukes or eye flukes or anything like that, those are going to do so much better at lower salinity. However, uranema will just explode on your fish. So you kind of have two options. You can raise the salinity and do a hypersalinity, or you can do freshwater formalin dips. And the freshwater formalin, will do 1 ml of formalin per gallon. We add just a drop of methylene blue. Do not use methylene blue according to the instructions. Just use like literally a drop in there. If you use it at the instructions, you'll probably burn the fish's gills. I don't like it otherwise, but just a tiny bit of methylene blue in there. Raise the blood's ability to carry oxygen. Heavy aeration in the bucket, and the fish do extremely well.
You do some breeding as well. You're a very busy wholesaler, but you're actually breeding stuff as well. So peppermint shrimps.
Yeah,
Mantis
peppermint shrimp
shrimp
is the newest addition. Yeah.
Talk to us about that.
Obviously we do clownfish. Everybody does clownfish, and the hardest part on breeding the clownfish is definitely going to be keeping the rotifers alive. Yeah. So if you have any desire to do any types of breeding and help pay for your addiction, start with rotifers, because you're going to find lots of creative ways in which you will kill them, right? And then basically from there, we started on seahorses. We were having a problem with our seahorses. Paul actually helped us fix it when he came over. And now our seahorses are just cranking out babies. We bred a hatchet type of mantis. So the hatchet, everybody knows like the peacock mantis. It'll smash your glass. They don't really do that. They can barely break their way out of a hard plastic container. So they're actually pretty cool to have. Some people know the zebra mantis that get very large, the black and white zebras. Well, the hatchet mantis is much smaller. It looks exactly like a zebra, but it stays at about this size. And
so hang on, it's not a clubber or a spearer.
Nope.
It's a hatchet.
It's a hatchet. It's
a third type.
We got it, and it didn't sell, so we decided to breed it because that makes the most sense. But we had to actually look up what it was, because we thought initially we got it. It looked like a baby spear type mantis, but it didn't have the spears. So then we had to go to scientific texts and try to figure out what this was. And there's actually a third type, which is the hatchet type mantis shrimp. And yeah, we got a male and a female, and the female would make its little tunnel. They like to bury themselves straight down in the gravel. And she would be poking out of the little tunnel and looking at the male over there. And then the male came over, and they both disappeared down together. And not too long after, we would get a nice big cluster of eggs on the surface. And we collected the eggs. We put them in a chrysal. We started feeding them rotifers, and we were able to bring them to post-larval settlement.
Wow. And now you've got thousands of mantis.
No, we didn't take them farther than that.
Oh,
Yes,
right,
we got
okay.
them to post-larval settlement, but
Yeah.
we still have the original pairs, and if we wanted to bring them further, we certainly
We're
could.
still working on that stuff.
Yeah.
So we had an interesting conversation about peppermint shrimp
Yep.
that you've bred, and we were talking about the species.
Yes.
So we know a bit about them over here. Certain species are more or are better for ectasia control than others.
Yeah.
And you did some experiments, and you collected a load from a lot of suppliers, and they weren't the right species.
Yeah, so we tried getting them to do our breeding project, and what we kept getting were bogus eyes. Again, we went back to the scientific journals, and we discovered a paper where they had gone and looked at what is available in the industry. So it was a research institute that wanted to do a breeding program with Wordamanis. So when people look at peppermint shrimp, the two most prevalent are Wordamani and Bogasai. Wordamanis come from the Southern Keys, and Bogasais will typically come out of Tampa for our industry. And this research institute, okay, we want to breed Wordamani. This is the key species. This is what we want to look at. That's the one that you get. It eats Aptasia. It never picks at your corals. That is exactly what you want, right? Well, the research institute looked at it, and every single piece that they got from our industry were Bogasais, but they were all labeled as Wordamani. So then they took it one step further and they imported from every single supplier that they could find in the USA that had them available and listed them as Wordamani. And none of them were Wordamani. They were all 100% Bogasai. And so the Bogasais will still eat your Aptasia, but they might start picking on your corals thereafter. Bogasais actually have 2 less life cycles, larval stages. So with those 2 less larval stages,
Easier to breed.
it might be easier to breed. And then when you look at the scientific literature that's out there, the results range from, it took me 3 years and I had a 3% success rate after 3 years to, yeah, we bred them and we had 75% success rate on feeding Artemia. And it's like, this is not repeatable. There's a missing link that exists in here.
And there's, I only found this out a couple of years ago. So the peppermint shrimp that we keep in our aquariums are bycatch from.
They're bycatch, yeah.
So what do you know about that? Do you say Tampa they come from?
Yeah, right now the Bogasais, well, we won't see them out of Tampa for a while, but typically the ones that were coming out of Tampa were bycatch from the shrimp boats, and then the ones that were coming out of the Florida Keys were bycatch from crab boats. But the problem is that the industry in Florida has been ravaged by storms, by changing temperatures. You know, they go to pull the traps and there's no crabs, so they leave the traps in. So that's why we saw basically the disappearance of Wordamani in our industry was because the crab traps weren't coming up, because with the changing temperatures, the crabs weren't coming up for the traps. So that's kind of where they've disappeared. So for us to get some Wordamani to breed, we had to pay our supplier to go and hand catch peppermint shrimp at night, you know, lifting rocks and using a fish net to try to catch them under the rock. So in terms of cost per unit, it was not good.
That was quite expensive,
That was
wasn't
quite
it?
expensive, yeah.
Yeah. How many did he catch for you?
I think 20, right?
20.
Yeah, we had to pay a boat to go out and hand catch peppermint shrimp for a net of 20 peppermint shrimp. But if you want to breed them, the cost of the initial animals really is negligible compared to hopefully your end goal on producing them.
Cool. Right. Thank you very much for that. As I say, I learned so much from you. And Paul, you visited their facility and you learnt stuff about health.
Always. When you spend any time with Pat and Trina, you're always there.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. So thank you, Pat and Trina from Reef Wholesale.
Good job. Good job.
Okay, another one of our main events. This is Thein from Tidal Gardens. We all know him from YouTube. Thanks so much for coming to the UK, Thein.
It's been great.
We're a big fan of yours, and it was quite the coup for Paul to manage to get you over, because from my reef builders connections, I know you're not easy to book, and you don't do a lot of these things, really, do you?
I've tried to keep my schedule kind of bare.
Yeah.
And every now and again comes an opportunity that I can't say no to. So it's been wonderful coming here.
Okay, great. So obviously we know you from YouTube, and tell us about your journey into coral farming, because it was something to do with college or business.
Okay, so this was like in the, I guess, like early 2000s. And back then there really wasn't a whole ton of aquaculture activity going on. And as you know, as a hobbyist, if you're at all successful as a hobbyist, you have to prune back corals because there's constant coral warfare. And then at the time I was in business school, and I was just thinking, well, what to do with these cuttings? Do I throw them away? That's not a great idea. Do I, try to sell them back to stores? Like, what exactly? And again, business school at the time, and I was just thinking, just as an academic exercise, let's take a look at what this would look like if I actually commercialize this at scale. Wrote a, 30-page business plan. And at the time, they were doing business plan competitions and whatnot. And that business plan that I did for like a college project ended up, I think, winning me 30 something thousand dollars
Wow.
at these business plan competitions. And obviously, the $30,000 back then was wonderful. But the biggest difference that that made was that all of like friends and family that might have had like reservations about even having this as a hobby, that was like a waste of time, waste of resources, let alone like a side hustle. Uh, all of their perspectives overnight changed when the business community at large said, "This is a great idea. You're the grand prize winner of lots of money." And all of a sudden, you have tremendous support. And starting out a business, nothing replaces like tremendous support from like friends and family and all that stuff. Like, there's no way that as like a single soul entrepreneur that I would have been able to make it without that. So yeah, that exactly that one little academic project made a huge difference.
But you've had your trials and tribulations because didn't you have a wipeout as well in your farm at one point?
Yeah, so we started with a greenhouse facility, with the idea that, oh, we're going to use the sun because it's the perfect light on the perfect timer, which is not true. It turns out that it might have been the perfect light on the perfect timer in Florida or in Fiji, but not in Ohio. We have winters, and in the winter, the light intensity is way down, the photo period is way down, summers are completely different. So we were trying acropora, and basically you can achieve peak coloration in acropora for about 3 weeks a year. And at that point, no more acropora for sale, right? But to your question, we had a particularly bad winter. And there's not a lot, there's no game plan to build a coral greenhouse facility. So you just kind of have to like make it work. And making it work means you need to be able to survive the hottest day in the summer, which might be 105 degrees. And then you have to survive the coldest winter day, which might be like -20 Fahrenheit. And you also need to have a facility robust enough to handle potentially a blizzard that drops 3 feet of snow onto your greenhouse.
Wow.
And that's where I had a problem because I happened to be visiting my parents. That's just 20 minutes away. And we had this incredible blizzard. I could not leave my parents' place. And what had happened at the greenhouse was that we had like this gas burning fireplace, or not fireplace, like a furnace. And it had a 3-foot chimney type structure. And the snow stacked up so high that it blocked that chimney, and the fan for this unit blew out the pilot light. So it could not ignite anymore. And so we lost the entire building because I could not get back to that greenhouse for 3 days.
Wow.
Yeah. And I was 20 minutes away.
That's crazy.
So after that, I was literally thinking about quitting. And of all people, again, parents who might not have initially been incredibly supportive, they talked me back into it. They said, "You know what? We've already built the building. Let's retool some stuff, and we'll get this back going again." Because I was already, I was partway through law school at the time, and I was like, "Oh, I'll be good. We can not do this coral thing, but no, let's try it again." And thankfully, we did it. We improved a lot of like the robustness of that facility, and fast forward a few years, and it's really worked out. Much better than law.
Yeah. So tell us about your YouTube journey, because that's how we kind of know you over here, for your instructional videos, very well produced films, great narration, and just very calm and relaxing. And how much has that been a positive influence in your business?
It's the only reason anybody knows who I am.
Yeah.
Period. Nobody cares that I have a coral farm.
Yeah.
I promise you. There's a lot of people with coral farms. Nobody cares about them. It is because of the YouTube channel. And initially I got into it because I wanted to have some multimedia type content onto my website. Like, I bought the very first Canon camera that could shoot 1080p video. It was a Canon 5D Mark II. And it was an accident that I even bought that camera, because I was choosing between two different cameras. One that only shot stills, but arguably did it better than the Canon. Or I bought this Canon that has like this side little perk that it could shoot video. Changed my life. Like, that little coin flip changed my life, because I got the Canon and I started into the whole video thing. And like I said, originally it was just to provide just a little bit extra on a coral page, for example. But that snowballs over the years. And yeah, it's absolutely made all the difference in the world.
So how often do you produce content these days?
So that's tricky. Um, I would be thrilled if I was able to produce a video every 2 weeks.
Oh wow, not that frequent then.
Not that frequent. And I struggle to do it once every 2 weeks. The production schedule gets a little bit longer and longer. And it also depends on like how ambitious the video project is. Like if it's just like a tank update, that's very fast. And we don't typically do a lot of those. But if it involves like implementing a new filtration system onto a large commercial scale, that's going to be a problem, right? Or if it is something that, that just requires a lot of acquisition of footage that might be tricky to get, that extends the time frame. Sometimes I get too busy and it's like really difficult to cut away time to do scripting. That can be a challenge. So
Okay.
2 weeks, I'd be super happy.
And you already started with a good camera. 5D Mark II is a full frame camera, but now you've got next level equipment compared with the lay reefer.
Yeah, so the funny thing about like both photography and videography is that those are two hobbies that sprung up from the reef aquarium hobby for me. And so whenever I get into a hobby, things kind of get off the rails a little bit. And so Tidal Gardens as a company, the mantra when it came to audio visuals type stuff is absolutely cost no object no matter what. So we literally bought anything that we thought could help. And that includes very fancy cameras, very fancy lenses, motorized sliders, motorized lifts, all kinds of stuff. And what I've learned is that a lot of the really exotic stuff gets used a lot less.
Right.
So over time, I'm like, you know what? I probably don't need some of this craziness because like some of the stuff gets so specialized. You use it once a year
Yeah.
and it's $15,000. It's dumb.
Wow.
So I had to scale it back a little bit. But camera wise, yeah, we do have some pretty fancy professional cinema cameras.
But what that tells me is that your production values and your capture, it's no accident then. You invest heavily in making
because
good film.
Yeah, our aquariums are very challenging subjects to shoot.
Yeah.
I think that people maybe take it for granted these days because there's like so many people shooting very, very good video. But as a subject matter, it is incredibly technically difficult. Like just cameras, for instance, they're not made to shoot very, very, very blue things. They're made to shoot daylight things.
I take it you're not using an orange lens.
Almost never. Once you get into professional cinema series cameras, they have a very top end of what you can compensate for to the point where it basically looks like an orange filter, but it's being done in camera. So if we have to use an orange filter, it's like a very extreme case where it's only blue light in the tank, that sort of thing.
We had an interesting conversation the other day about kind of farmers and what a coral farm is. And you kind of rank them or rate them on how self-sufficient they are in corals. Because a little known fact is you don't import anything. Is that right?
Correct. We do not have an import license. We do not do import.
Okay.
We do work with wholesalers that do import.
But you just handpick, select.
Yeah, I would consider us a bad customer because so in a giant wholesale facility, we really might be interested in about 10 pieces. And everything else is not of interest to us. So we buy low volume of highly desirable stuff. So not the best customer in the world.
So how many corals, how many frags do you think you're holding in your facility then? Or is it just, have you ever thought about that?
No, thousands and
Tens of thousands.
a lot. Yeah, we would lose count.
And tell me about this self-sufficiency thing, because you said
Sure.
to me you are self-sufficient in corals.
Right. So I always kind of bristled at the idea of coral farms, and this is a personal hang up of mine. Okay, because I was thinking like I don't consider so and so a real coral farm, right? But what is the definition of a coral? There really isn't one. Like, are you propagating, therefore you're a coral farm? And so I got into some argument. I think it was with Sanjay Sanjay Joshi at one of these like conferences, and he said, "You don't think so and so is a coral farm?" I'm like, "No," but I couldn't exactly articulate it at the time. And so now I think that of this as a spectrum, okay? And it's like, how long would this organization survive if they were not able to acquire coral at all starting like tomorrow? Like there's no more import at all, completely shut down. How long can your facility survive? Is it 2 weeks? Not bad. Is it 3 months? That's quite a lot of propagation that has to happen. Is it years? And, I think that, I mean, perhaps coral farming is the entire spectrum, but where are we exactly? And so for Tidal Gardens, I literally think we could survive forever if import stopped tomorrow.
Wow.
Yeah. Because the sort of stuff that we would lose like scalemia, we would
Yeah.
lose trachees, we would lose elegances, maybe, things like that. But we really only like pick and choose like very, very small quantities of those, only to have it on the website. Barely, So we never have like 50 acanthophylia or anything like that. We have like 3. So yeah, when it comes to like long-term sustainability, I think we're really comfy with where we're at.
What's your single biggest selling coral?
Okay, so as of right this second, I don't know, but I jokingly say that this new Tidal Gardens facility is the house that Xenia built.
Xenia.
Xenia, yeah. It is. So like our customer base is very, very like polarized. Either it is incredibly inexpensive, easy to keep corals,
Yeah.
or it is the shockingly expensive, cost no object stuff. The stuff in the middle, it does okay, but really it is built upon like these 2 poles. And so when people say, "Look, Xenia is a pest," it's basically just like an overrunning weed. It's like, careful. I will not tolerate Xenia slander here. Not in my house. See all this? Yeah.
So in your tanks, I watched it in a recent video. I think it was one that when Paul visited. In most of your tanks, you've got a kind of a fishy cleanup crew consisting of a copper band, foxface, sailfin tang, and a Melanoris wrasse.
Yeah, so a few other like mixes of wrasses are in there. Like Timor wrasses we quite like a lot. Sometimes we can find possum wrasses. We like them. The occasional 6-line, and every now and again we can find a leopard wrasse that stays alive. They tend to be very, very delicate. But yeah, I think that the core functional group handles a lot of like the herbivore activity as well as like the pest cleanup. And every now and again we get a rescue clownfish that just bites everybody.
Yeah, yeah. So talk to us about Kalkwasser then, Thein, because you Americans are obsessed with Kalkwasser, it would seem. All of my reef builders colleagues use it. They all rave about it. You use it.
Yes, and we actually went for about, I don't know, 15 years without using it. It was something that I always thought was like super easy, yeah, as a hobbyist. It's inexpensive, it's highly effective, raises pH. Pretty much the easiest implementation ever. You just drip it in, pretty much done. The reason why I initially stopped using it was because it is also possible you could screw it up. You could overdose it very, very quickly and cause like this milkshake chemical burn going on, damages your fish, damages your coral. And as my business grew, it's like I relied more and more and more on staffing. And it is one of those things that if a staff member messes it up, it's like this unforgivable thing. And I was noticing that occasionally I would mess it up. And if I'm able to mess it up, they definitely are going to be able to mess it up. So we completely went away from that. We went to calcium reactors and whatnot. But you know what? Over time, things change, technology changes, and inexpensive, higher quality peristaltic pumps became a thing. And suddenly it's like, oh, I have in my answer to the Kalkwasser idiot problem. And we don't need to like worry about like, detailed dosing of anything and dripping. It's like, no, you just set it on this thing. It constantly runs and you can really set it and forget it to a large degree. And that started the resurgence of Kalkwasser back into my facilities. So we can make it 30 gallons at a time and just slowly dose it in.
Is that something that you use, Pat and Trina?
I do not, right, use Kalkwasser. After going to his place, I thought about using it again. We dose calcium and alkalinity, and then we'll add sometimes potassium hydroxide to buffer pH up. We have a big facility with a lot of staff, but that because it's wholesale, we have a lot of doors closed. So CO2 scrubbers are effectively useless. So we needed an alternative to help raise our pH a little bit and react with the carbonic acid.
What are your thoughts on pH and CO2? Is that an issue in your facility with your coral?
No, so we've never had an issue with that because when we had the greenhouse facility, well, we still do. In the greenhouse facility, it's essentially like an open, fresh air type exchange going on. In the new building, we have multiple, I think 4 different air exchangers plus exhaust fans. So that building is constantly getting fresh air. We never really struggle with pH, but having Kalkwasser provide that little extra boost is always welcome for us.
We were talking about Jake Adams the other day and Reef Builders, and you were one of the last reef therapy interviews that you did together. And you said how you were talking about an issue with one of your acros, was it? And he kind of pinpointed this thing that was a bit out of the box.
Yeah, one of my biggest regrets is that I didn't get to spend more time with Jake and pick his brain about stuff because it's rare that you find somebody that has like that level of experience and has seen so much because it's these fringe cases of like crazy nonsense, and that's the stuff that you're going to run into and really not have an answer for. It's not going to be, oh, did you check your salinity? How's your temperature? Was your pH too? No, it's going to be something weird, and you need to have you need to have people in your social circle that have seen the fringe weirdness, right? And so when I was over there, I had mentioned in literally like one sentence description of some of my acropora that were not doing well. And he said, it just immediately jumped on that. He's like, have you ever tried to test your copper level? I'm like, no, never. Why would I test for copper in my reef systems, right? And we got some wonky results, but that led us down this rabbit hole of, yes, there is some kind of heavy metal poisoning going on. And we audited all of our pumps, anything with that's metal, that's a magnet of any kind, started to take a look at all of that in our systems. And sure enough, there were several pumps that the impeller had swelled and cracked and was leaching in some kind of heavy metal. There were all kinds of like algae magnets that we had left in the water that are waterlogged. You would pull them up, red liquid drains out of it. It's like, that's not good. And so, yeah, it's like these sorts of things that are really super valuable from the most experienced of hobbyists.
One of your customers is Andrew Sandler.
Yes.
Talk to us about him. What's his tank like? Have you been there?
I've been there 2 times now. It's really interesting because it's this constantly evolving thing too. Because I think that initially he built basically a public aquarium in his home as if he were a hobbyist. And a lot of things don't translate when you move up to something that big. And I think a lot of like initial struggles that he had was because of like a hobbyist approach to what amounts to a professional project, where a lot of these things might have been like figured out already at the professional aquarist level, like big institutional things. That's not an issue in those things because they've struggled back in like the 1900s with that stuff, right? So when you try to scale up hobbyist stuff to something like that big, you're going to run into all kinds of problems. And so I think over time he's been having to retool a lot of that stuff. And so I think a lot of that stuff is a lot more smooth now. But the scope of that project is so big that it gets to a point where you just start getting worried. Like there's so much that could possibly go wrong in something this big. Like how do you deal with like these issues? And yeah, it was quite impressive that it exists at all because it is such an ambitious thing.
Is that your new facility there?
That is.
Paul's been there, and Paul has a lovely store, and he said it's the tidiest, best facility you've ever been to, Paul.
It genuinely is. And I've been a lot of places. It's just something that it genuinely is the best thing I've ever.
It blew you away. perfectionist.
About there, just from the layout and just everything from planning to start, to the way he runs his business, to the coral things. I mean, it's spectacular.
No, I appreciate that. But part of the reason I think that I have to be kind of like nagging and negative about it is that's kind of my job. I'm not there to enjoy like when things are going smoothly. I have to go under the assumption that there's always something breaking. I have to find it. Like that sort of thing.
Let's talk
Whiskey.
whiskey. Well, I heard you make
guests only.
good gelato. Is that right?
Yeah, it's a pretty cushy gig. It's a pretty cushy gig. Yeah, so yes, there's an on-site gelato machine.
And heated toilet.
Heated toilets,
Yes, there are.
and
Yes.
you've got a cloud ceiling.
Yes. And there's a massage chair in the cloud ceiling studio. So
Yeah, and the world's biggest expanse of sound deadening material.
Yeah, okay. So part of that is me being crazy about sound, but there are some practical purposes to that. Besides, like obviously a recording studio is a recording studio. We'll leave that off to the side. But in an actual coral farming facility, there are benefits to having well-controlled sound. Because going back to my thought process of there's always something wrong, there's always something breaking, you can hear a lot of these sounds when something is wrong. And one of these times was I had updated my phone. I got a new iPhone. And on one of my controllers, I got the most innocent of error messages. Like it just said, hey, we have a clock error. Press this button to fix it. Press that button. All of my peristaltic pumps immediately went to 100%. That might have escaped my detection had I not been able to hear it from a different floor in my facility.
Wow.
Yeah, so there are some practical benefits to these things.
You're an incredibly dapper gentleman, Thein. You dress far better than us English, it would appear to me. Do you do reefing in your suit? What happens when you're fragging or taking out a dead enemy? Are you wearing that?
Not exactly. I try to keep my hands out of the tank as much as possible. But I'll tell you what, if I didn't have this jacket on, I would have no trouble doing any and all maintenance on my systems. That's a technique thing.
Wow.
Just don't. It's funny because I one time I had a helper over like a summer break, and I was stunned at how much salt water he could get on himself. And it's simply a technique thing. Like the entire front of his shirt was like drenched from doing regular stuff. I didn't ask him for anything incredibly difficult, but yeah. No, it can be done.
No, it's you are a very smartly dressed man, definitely. So I think that's about it for now. We're going to wrap it up and have a quick interval and get a coffee, toilet, etc. Thein and Pat Trina, thank you very much indeed.
So there you have it, episode 2 of Coral Freaks and Audience with. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Stay tuned for next week's episode, which is the live Q&A. As always, there's plenty more seeing the fish.